In this video, I'm going to show you the most commonly asked HSBC interview questions and give you a guide to what you need to prepare to be successful with an interview at HSBC. So let's start with a question that you've really got to be well prepared for, and that is, what can you tell me about HSBC? So I'm going to show you some facts that you can take to your interview, tell you the sort of things that you should be preparing, and show you how to answer this question. So the way that you always start with this sort of question is you tell them the things that are obvious. You show that you know the basics. Then you start with some things that are less obvious, that only people that know a little bit about the company would know. And then you drop in a few things that very few people perhaps would know about HSBC to show that you actually have that deeper level of knowledge. So let's look at the facts that you can talk about in your interview. The first thing you say is that HSBC is a universal bank. That is the simplest way of describing them. They have business that involves personal banking, so that's retail banking, wealth management, and private banking. They've got commercial banking, and they have investment banking interests. They are highly geographically diversified. At the time of making this video, they're in 64 countries, but that's probably going to increase over time. So it's a good idea to know just how many markets they're in and realize that HSBC is spread across the entire planet, basically, though they don't have much of a business in Antarctica, but pretty much everywhere else you're going to find some sort of link to HSBC. They are called the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. That's what the HSBC actually stands for. They were originally founded all the way back in 1865, and they are really a global bank, but with local expertise. So there's a massive global conglomerate called HSBC Holdings that controls everything, but on the ground they are experts in their local markets, and that's how the business operates. You should know their global product lines. So at the minute, this is things like HSBC Advance, HSBC Premier, and all the different levels there. I would make sure that you know the different levels and different brands that HSBC are operating under currently. Currently, they refer to these as their global product line, so that, of course, may change in the future. Historically, they are formed by acquiring lots of different businesses that has caused them to be this massive global concern. They started in Hong Kong, but really have expanded outwards. So one of the big acquisitions they made in the UK was buying Midland Bank. They've bought a French bank. They took over HFC, which was a large consumer finance business in America that is now the kind of bedrock of HSBC finance. And they also bought the Republic National Bank of New York, that is what really pushed their American presence. They are committed to net zero and have made various pledges towards that. So you could talk about their performance towards those goals and what they are doing to achieve that. They have their own business school. They made large donations to business schools in China, and they are part of that. They've got the HSBC Lions that have very interesting history that stand outside their offices, and you can read about that and be ready to discuss those. They have a famous employee. So if you go back and look at the author P.G. Wodehouse, he originally worked for the bank for a short period of time and is one of their most famous previous employees. Another great tip is to read the investor presentations and the annual reports. I would start with the presentations because they are short, easy to read very quickly, and it gives you a good feeling for what senior management's priorities are and gives you a great introduction. And then to fill in and extend your knowledge, it's a good idea to read the annual report. So feel free to take notes from the slide or screenshot it. And these are the sort of things and phrases that you can be using in your interview. The next question I want to talk about is, what is your greatest strength? And this is one that seems to come up very regularly. I've seen this reported many times by people who've had interviews at HSBC, so it's obviously one that gets asked more frequently. So make sure you've got a good answer to this. And I can't tell you what your greatest strength is, but what I can do is show you how to plan a good answer and answer this question and what they are looking for in your answer, so that once you've identified your strength, you've got a really good answer. So let's think about what they actually want. They want an important strength, something that actually matters to their business and is a real, genuine strength of great importance. They want something that is well evidenced. If you can provide some evidence or something that backs up your strength, it makes your answer so much more powerful. So instead of just them believing that this is a strength, you can actually show them that it definitely is. So have examples or some form of evidence ready to back it up. The next thing is make it specific. So don't talk about wide general strengths that encompass lots and lots and lots of different areas and are very broad. Nail it down to a very specific, important strength and it has to be highly relevant to HSBC. So think about the particular job that you're applying for and what some of the most important things in that job are, and match your strength to that. So let's imagine, for example, you're applying for a risk management position. You might answer something like this: I have developed strong knowledge of credit risk management theory. That is very specific. Then let's make the answer stronger with some evidence. This was the focus of my master's degree thesis, which achieved a first class. So you're saying, I have this strength. I've presented this strength to an expert in the field, a professor, a lecturer, and they have backed up that as a strength by awarding it a first class. So there is some proof that this is a real strength. Then what you do, and you mustn't forget to do this, you say this strength will enable me to quickly add value to HSBC by, and explain how this strength is going to make you a good employee. Because your goal with this question is to show them that you're a good hire. So explain to them why this strength is going to make you good at your job, and then you're going to ace this question, and that's how you get through the what is your greatest strength question. On the flip side, they often ask, what is your greatest weakness? And you need to have a weakness ready, because if you don't and you try and make up one on the spot, it's not going to be a good answer. So let's look at what you should say in this answer and how you actually answer it. So the first thing is, you've got to be reflective. If you say you don't have a greatest weakness, or you don't have any weaknesses, or you give a non-answer, it is not going to look very good, and it suggests that you're actually not very reflective and you've got no idea what your development needs are, which is a real negative when you're hiring someone. The next thing you want to do is make sure you're doing something about it. You want to spend more time talking about what you can do to overcome the weakness than why this is such a crippling weakness. And then you want to make sure it's not important to HSBC. So if you're applying for banking and you talk about not really understanding numbers and hating maths, that is going to stop you getting the job. So make sure it's something that isn't actually hugely important and is something that you could improve by the time that it actually becomes important. So if you're applying for an entry-level role, you can give certain answers of things that are really important long-term, but not in the role that you're applying to, but in 2-3 years, you've got time to develop it. So let's look at how you answer it. So you could say, one area I have identified as a current weakness and focus for my professional development is. So you're not just saying I'm terrible at this, you're saying this is something that I'm currently not great at, but I want to actually work on. You just say what it is. Don't talk about it at great length. Spend the time saying, over time, I hope to, and explain what you are actually going to do to improve it. Some non-answers that you must avoid is saying none, that you work too hard, that you're detail-orientated, or you're a perfectionist. All of these are treated as non-answers. And if you use them, they might say, okay, can you give me another weakness? And then you have to think of something else. Or they might just mark you down for giving those bad answers. Some that you might actually want to consider is you might say, I would like to gain more experience in, particularly if you're early in your career, or you have some awareness of a different aspect of the business that's related, but you haven't had the time to really develop that area, which is next to what your main area is, but it's not the main focus of the job. If you're new to work, this may be a graduate job, you could talk about delegation, or you might talk about improving your work-life balance. Say that when you're at university, you worked really, really hard on your assignments, and you could feel your work-life balance slipping, and so you're looking at ways of working more efficiently so you can get everything done to a high standard, but using less time, which frees up time in the evenings for a better work-life balance. That's quite a nice and genuine and honest answer. So that's how you get through the what is your greatest weakness question. Another question they often ask is, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? So you want to have a basic plan, and I would recommend you look at what people are doing 5 years after applying for the job that you're applying for, and you can research that, and you want to say something that is reasonable. So the first thing you've got to make sure is that it is reasonable. Don't talk about being the chief executive of HSBC in 5 years' time or something completely ridiculous. Then you want to check LinkedIn. So you don't have to say that you're doing this in the interview. You don't have to discuss this. It's just to get a good feeling for what people are achieving within 5 years. So look at people that in the past had the job you're applying to and see what they're doing 5 years later. And that's a good way to gauge what typical progression looks like at HSBC. Of course, you don't have to be progressing. You could talk about being exceptional at the current role and taking on maybe some mentoring and other things within that role. Then you want to be sensitive to the interviewer. One mistake that people make is they say that they will be the person that's interviewing them's boss, or that they'll be one level above the person who's interviewing you. And it might have taken that person 15 years to get to that point, and you're saying that you're going to do it in 5 years and jump ahead of them. That's not going to be very popular. And then the next thing is takes advantage of HSBC. So do not talk about leaving. Don't talk about doing things outside of HSBC. Talking about leaving a company while you're at interview at that company is always a bad idea. So things to avoid is anything that is just ridiculous because it makes them not take you seriously, that's got little thought, or is not relevant to HSBC. So focus on developing within HSBC and with an answer that is perfectly reasonable. So an answer might be something like, you're planning to start as a graduate. The graduate scheme is 2 years long, say, and then after that, you'll be looking to achieve an analyst position. And by the end of your 5 years, you might be looking to move into a trading role and starting that process. And that seems a fairly reasonable progression that follows what other people have achieved. It's not ridiculous, it is somewhat ambitious, but it is perfectly reasonable. So keep an answer that is reasonable and in line with what a 5-year career at HSBC could look like. And that's going to give you quite a good answer. Then the next question, of course, is extremely important, which is simple. Why HSBC? And you've got to have a good answer to this one. Now, I would say this question, of all the questions that are likely to come up, and this one is basically certain to come up, I'd recommend you actually take some time and actually plan it. So bullet point it out, or even write it out in full, because whatever you come up with in, say, half an hour or 40 minutes of really careful planning is going to be so much better than what you can think up on the spot. And having an answer ready will make it so much stronger and so much more powerful. So let's think about what you should say and what you shouldn't say, and some inspiration. So the first thing is, think about, how does HSBC stand out? You've decided to apply to HSBC and you could have applied to lots of other banks. Why is HSBC a really good bank for you? Some things you might think about is it's a universal bank and you would like to work for a universal bank. Perhaps, say, for example, you speak various languages. You could talk about how your work could link in with those businesses. So if you've got a particular interest in, say, Asia, and you're looking to work in business involving the Asian market, you talk about that as an interest. It's highly geographically diversified, and you see that that's going to provide lots of opportunities to work in wide and varied environments. You could be talking about an interest in HSBC providing cross-border finance, and instead of just being working for a bank that is fixed to one market largely, you've got this huge international market with lots of cross-border finance, and that's an interest of yours. Then you want to think about what is interesting about your function. Remember, you're not just applying to HSBC. If you've decided to apply, for example, private banking, why have you decided on private banking instead of working in commercial banking? So you want to think about the particular function and have 2 or 3 sentences about why you decided on this part of HSBC. Then you want to explain how it links to your interests. So why are you interested in banking? So you're basically planning a why banking answer, and then using that to strengthen your why HSBC answer. Then you want to think about what training is provided. So research what training people get when joining in this role, and talk about your interest in that and why you see HSBC as being a really good quality provider of training and someone who is going to help you develop. And then you want to show real enthusiasm. So when you're discussing these things and you're discussing HSBC, be really passionate and be really enthusiastic. Some things that you never say is, I live near the bank, or any idea that this job is convenient to you. Talking about salary, talking about this as, or even just suggesting the idea this is a good place to start out, a good first step in a career, talking about HSBC as being a prestigious employer. These are all things to definitely avoid. And really anything that's not of interest to HSBC, that doesn't show that you're the right hire and someone that's motivated and deeply interested in joining the business and has a good understanding of it, is not going to help you. So focus on what's on the left, don't say anything on the right, and definitely take some time to plan it out and have a few sentences for each of these bullet points on the left, and you will have a good answer ready. Another question that is very common in HSBC interviews is, tell me about a time you faced a challenge and how you overcame it. So what I'm going to do here is show you a method of planning it and what they actually want to hear. So what they want is significant obstacles. So don't pick something that's only a minor challenge. Pick somewhere where you've actually had to struggle, where you've got an ambitious target, where any disagreements within the team, any difficulties were managed very professionally, and where there's a positive outcome. Do not pick any example which does not have a positive outcome. So that's what you're looking for when you're picking your example. What you don't want is somewhere where you've easily overcame it, where you've just got a small barrier. That's not going to be very impressive. Where you've behaved in any way that's unprofessional, where the problems were caused by you doing the wrong thing in an unprofessional way, that's not something you want to be revealing in an interview. Where you didn't really learn anything, so even if it went slightly wrong, that's fine, but you need to say what you learned and how you actually reflected on that issue. And then anything that is involving blaming others, to say that someone else did this and it ruined it all and it wasn't my fault, is very, very bad thing to do in an interview. Don't give the impression that, I'm the superhero that came in and saved the day, that everything was going wrong until I came in and magically fixed everything and nobody could do anything until I've arrived. That is very arrogant. So you want to be a part of the solution, perhaps an important part of the solution, but acknowledge the contributions and works of other people rather than just presenting yourself as a superhero figure. That's very bad to do. And then anything that had a negative outcome is the wrong example. So take some time to look at the left-hand side, thinking about all the challenges that you've had in your career or in your education, how you overcame it. Focus on the left-hand side and make sure your example doesn't involve anything on the right-hand side, and you've got a good starting point for this answer. Some ideas of things that might be your example is place where you've had very tight deadlines, where there's been perhaps an IT failure, where you had something prepared and it was just deleted or it vanished and it was completely outside of your control, but you managed to survive and get through anyway, where you had to learn quickly. Maybe you took on a new role or something changed very quickly and you had to adapt to it. Maybe you had to cover for an absent colleague, so you were maybe short-staffed and you had to pick up some extra and be doing two things at once, and that was challenging to manage, but you managed to get through it and succeed anyway. That's how you think about it. When you come to actually answering it, you've got to use the STAR technique. That's a really powerful and simple way of structuring your answer. So you start with the situation, then the task, then the action, and then the result. You see how that spells the word STAR. Simply what you do is you explain what was a challenge, just in one or two sentences. Why was it actually challenging? And then what you want to do is explain clearly what the task was. What did you have to achieve? What was the goal? How did you actually have to get there? Then the action. What did you do to overcome the challenge? What actions did you and your team do in order to rise to that challenge? And then lastly, you explain the result, and you really should be happy with the result and enthusiastic about what you achieved and very positive about it, and say, what was the success that you enjoyed in the end, and clearly explain what result came from it and make sure it's something really positive. And let's think about what you need to actually do when you're planning your answer around that STAR technique. So there's certain points that they would like you to show. So you ought to show that you're a solutions focused person, that you're not getting basically obsessed with all the problems and not being able to do it. You're focusing on fixing it. So there's no finger pointing, there's no blaming other people. What you've got to say in your answer is that you identified the issue that was causing difficulty, you understood the problem, and then you did something to actually fix it. They want to see that you've got high standards, that you don't let your standards slip or cut corners in adversity. So in your example, don't pick somewhere where something went a little bit wrong and you found a way to cheat, a way to get round that, maybe even if it's creative, but it's still not delivering the high standards. Then you want to show some team working skills, so you collaborate with others to find solutions, and that if part of the problem was someone was struggling, you were there offering support and you were really helpful and you help to make that successful, that you get the best out of people. So where you've got people working with you, that you are helping get the best from them. So you're improving the performance of others, which helps lead to the success. And then the most important thing is you actually hit the end point. One of HSBC's current values is getting the job done. So you actually get the job done effectively despite the challenges, and you are very clear about what success you actually achieved, and you make them see what impact your success had. So you've got a great example of where you were successful, but you had genuine difficulties to overcome, and you were successful in doing that. And that's really how you plan the perfect example. And it also shows off all these things that they're looking for, and that will help you score highly. Then another thing that I'm going to suggest you do is I prepared a list for you of the things that you should prepare. And I'm suggesting you make what's called a fact file about HSBC. So there's lots and lots of different things they might ask about, and things that when you're in the interview, just knowing and just having in your head will make it so much easier. So I'm going to give you a list before we go on and look at some questions that you might want to ask at the end of your interview. What I'd recommend you do once the list comes up is basically answer every single question. It may take you an hour to do, but it's an hour well spent. And then learn those answers, cover it up, say it back, cover it up, say it back, and make sure that you've memorized it. Because when you're in the interview with all this knowledge floating around your head, you're going to have so much that you can draw on, and it's going to enhance all of your answers. So you should know the current stock price. I've heard them ask, what is our stock price? And if you have no idea, it doesn't look like you know the company very well. You want to know last year's revenue and profit, just two simple numbers. Remember it, get them from the annual reports. The CEO, the chairman, and the head of the division, the section of the bank that you're applying to, make sure you know all three of those names. You want to know their main competitors, and that will differ depending on where you're applying. If you're applying in London, HSBC's main competitors in the UK market and in the London market are going to be very different to if you're applying in Hong Kong. There's going to be different competitive challenges in different markets. You ought to know their current regulatory threats. I would recommend that you have 3 pieces of recent news. So if they ask about any news, you can bring that in. You ought to have an example of a major deal completed recently within the area of the business that you're applying to. You want to know the number of customers served. Currently, it's about 40 million, but that number changes all the time. The number of countries served, it's just over 60, about 64. Make sure you know the exact number. They may move into markets. They may leave certain markets. You ought to know the current number. Know the bank's core values. They have changed them recently, so know the up-to-date ones. Think about the threats that the bank faces. Have one opportunity that you think the bank could seize upon that would help strengthen their business. And then sometimes I've heard, particularly for more analyst roles, they've said, could you pitch a stock to me? So have a good stock pick ready. I would focus on something where it's perhaps a smaller company, somewhere where you're probably going to be the expert on the room. If you pick something very famous that everyone knows, that's not going to be as easy to pitch to someone. And so if you focus on something a little bit more obscure, you can make a stronger case. And it probably is that you're more expert than most people if it's something quite niche. So definitely spend some time, have the answers to every one of these questions ready, and that will really help with the interview and just having that knowledge ready. The next one that we want to look at is, as a bonus, here are some good questions that you could ask at the end of your interview. So you could ask, could you please talk me through the next steps in your recruitment process, including a timeline, and if feedback is given, show an interest in feedback and development. You could say, in your experience, what would you say that the characteristics of highly successful HSBC hires are? And they'll tell you what people who've been really successful at the bank have done and what they're like, and you can link that to your skills and experience. You might want to ask what originally attracted you to HSBC, and you want to share in that interest and say that that's some of the things that have interested you about the role. And basically, you're agreeing with them on that and being really enthusiastic. You might want to ask, what should a new hire prioritize in the preparation for starting if successful? And they may suggest things that you could develop or things that you should know and bits of knowledge that you would probably find quite useful to have. And you can make a commitment to say, if you're successful, these are definitely things that you would make sure that you have done before starting at HSBC. And then you want to offer sincere thanks for the interview and end it on a positive note. And that's the last thing that you need to do. So I hope this video was helpful to you. If it was, please like and subscribe below. I wish you the best of luck in your HSBC interview, and thank you very much for watching it.